Hello, everybody.
Welcome to the Tribal Council podcast.
We're on this podcast, Survivor Represents Our Life.
When it's canceled, so are we. My name is Connor Boudreau.
And my name is Ethan Kronk, and today we're going to be talking about the 14th placers of the new era of Survivor. So this is a continuation of a series that we've been doing that's been doing pretty well, so I'm excited to get right into it. And not much to say except our first player in 9th place, the 14th placer from Survivor 43, Geo Bustamante. Connor, why don't you get us started on Geo?
Yes, well, you see, in Survivor, sometimes there's this thing that people do where they like to throw a challenge, try and vote someone out. I can't say I know the exact math on it, but I feel like it often doesn't go the way that people intend. So many times that Geo statistic in the wrong way, because that's pretty much the most notable thing that can be mentioned of Geo's game. I mean, he at least has the benefit of, having this somewhat awful idea on his own, and then bringing it up with his good buddy Ryan. However, it doesn't exactly go the way he wants. He goes home as a result of trying to throw this challenge, or I guess wanting the challenge to be thrown, because, again, he doesn't even do that himself.
I guess the big thing with Geo is the fact that he throws this challenge, or him and Ryan come up with a plan to throw this challenge, after Geo was one of the main targets at the first Tribal Council. He would have gone home, if not for Lindsay and her chaotic paranoia. And he's so oblivious to that fact that he thinks that he's running the tribe and he can throw a challenge to take out Cassidy, which is insane. The level of complete lack of awareness of Geo and Ryan, who we'll talk about several episodes from now, is so unbelievable. The fact that they feel so confident in their dominance over this tribe when they are very clearly on the outs, that they throw a challenge to try to get rid of Cassidy, is insane. And then you get into the fact that Geo shares his knowledge power with Carla, who happens to have the idol, and I mean, I don't give him too much flack for that, considering he had no way of knowing that Carla had the idol, but it's still just putting too much trust in someone who isn't trying to have your back. So that's why we have him in last place, but we move on to our 8th place contestant, from Survivor 46, Jem Hussain-Adams. Now, Jem, I think, is a significantly better player than Geo. She starts off the game attempting to form sort of a women's alliance with Mariah and Maria. Mariah is very receptive to it. Maria is also somewhat receptive to it, but she really forms her closest alliance with Charlie. And the two of them form another alliance with Ben and Tim. So, automatically, the dynamics have it so Charlie and Maria are in the power position. Jem does have something of an alliance. Whether it'll prove to be fruitful for her, we end up seeing that it isn't. She attempts to hide a Beware advantage after finding it and obtaining an idol, and I think it was an honorable attempt to make a big move. It ends up kind of blowing up in her face because Tim clocks her immediately. So all in all, it's just hard to really point out anything great about Jem's game. The fact that she isn't able to persuade Maria and Charlie to stick with herself and Mariah just isn't great. The fact that she's targeted over Mariah just isn't great. The fact that Tim clocks, the fact that she's doing all this weird stuff with her idol and the wild goose chase that she sends everyone on isn't great. But at least she had a really close ally in Mariah, which is more than we can say about Geo. I mean, that's not true. Geo had a really close ally in Ryan. I don't know what I'm talking about, but
What you mean to say is Jem did have the Charlie's Angels temporarily, right? There was some semblance of, I might have some power here. There was some semblance of decent social and strategic gameplay that looked like it could have existed, and as much as it doesn't. there is that at least shown ability to create such. Whereas, like, Geo genuinely thinks he has some kind of super, like, alliance or something, and tries to throw a challenge without addressing everyone and saying that this is exactly the case, with the understanding that that's actually going to happen either. Like, he genuinely just does this about really just him and Ryan deciding this, and thinks that that's just gonna fly, and has zero awareness of what's actually happened. Whereas Jem kind of just gets beat by a duo that plays the middle.
Yeah, I mean, she at least doesn't try to throw a challenge. She's not so confident in her dominance over the tribe that she tries to throw a challenge, you know? So...
Yeah, there's definitely a lot more that can be said about that to really show how much Geo lacked awareness, and Jem at least was just a constant, like, alright, could have had power, but didn't really play it well.
Yeah. Speaking of somebody who could have had power but didn't really play very well, in 7th we have, from Survivor 41, JD Robinson. Now, JD is a very interesting player. He, first of all, survived, I believe, the most tribal councils of anyone that we're going to talk about. Yeah, he does. And yet he's pretty low on this list, because he's just so messy. JD is a target at UA's first tribal council. Mind you, he's not a very serious target. It's kind of more so between Sarah and Brad, but he ends up forming a connection with Shan. Kind of ends up losing a lot of Shan's trust, though, after he goes on a journey, risks his vote, earns an extra vote, lies about it, nobody believes him, and then drops his extra vote, falls out of his pants, and, yeah, he's caught red-handed. I do think he makes a smart move in giving this extra vote to Shan to solidify trust. It plays into why Brad is ultimately eliminated. It was second tribal council over JD. But then, after having the extra vote handed back to him, he gives it right back to Shan again, and then gets his ass blindsided at the third tribal council that Ua goes to. And I just think his messy gameplay, the fact that he's immediately caught in a lie so early on, and he blows any sort of relationship he might have had with Shan. He never really has a relationship with Ricard. And also, like, he had a very good potential move that he could have made to maybe, instead of giving Shan his extra vote, use his extra vote in tandem with Jeannie to vote out Ricard. But instead of doing that, he just completely, hitches his wagon to Shan, who at this point very clearly doesn't trust him, and hands her an advantage so that she can blindside him and keep the advantage for herself. Do you have anything to add about JD?
Yeah, I think his game really falls apart when he tries to sell his story about how the journey goes, and unfortunately for him, this being the first version of the journeys that people have to deal with, it also doesn't really help. But it's just very messy, the way that he plays the whole situation, and then the follow-up of it isn't really good in the process of recovering it. Again, aside from, as you mentioned, the idea of handing his extra vote to Shan the first time as a sign of trust. It's just... I think he's pretty lucky that he does have somewhat of a very charismatic appearance with the first, like, real vote, that the fact that he's kind of mentioned, but Shan kind of wants to work with him, and then it just completely devolves after he just shows time and time again he isn't the most reliable ally.
Right. Yeah. It's the unreliability, it's the messiness, it's the chaos. It just doesn't end up being a good look for him. And even though he survives 2 tribal councils, he's a target at both of them. He doesn't do much to improve his position in the game. He just kind of plays to survive, and then when he has an opportunity to potentially make a big move and really improve his position in the game, he doesn't take it. If he takes out Ricard, and then they go to another tribal council, potentially he takes out Shan, and then him and Genie go into the merge. And who knows how that goes? But instead, he really just does not take the shot that he could have taken, and I don't even think it really is talked about as a consideration. So, unfortunately, JD lands pretty low on this list. But we move on to number 6, and here we have from Survivor 45, Matt Thompson. Now, Matt is a player who a lot of people probably argue should be higher on this list. I mean, he does get swap screwed, which is going to be a theme on this list for sure. However, the reason that we have Matt this low is A, his position on his original tribe just isn't nearly as good as any of the players on this list who were swap screwed, and B, the way that he plays the swap just makes him the target where he otherwise maybe could have not been. But if you want to go more in detail in explaining that, Connor, go ahead and take the stage.
Yeah, so the first real evidence of the fact that he didn't exactly have the best position beforehand, and doesn't really play the game that great, he seems to find himself in a situation where he throws out names in really bad social awareness. I mean, it's kind of shown that before on Hina, he's seen as a potential threat, given that he's not really the cleanest about who he throws out names to, and then gets into a swap where what's his first immediate reaction? Let's go after Sophie. No, that doesn't seem like that's gonna work. You know what? I'm gonna suggest to Jawan that we go after Nate. When Jawan fully believes he's in with the majority, and at that point fully is in the majority. I don't know. It just, to me, it screams that he didn't have enough social awareness in his ability to figure out where he really stood, and then sitting next to someone else who potentially could be the target here, instead of really lining up some kind of, move to be like, okay guys, you know what, I'll vote Jason, we'll work with you, it's not the end of the world, you guys keep me around. No, he just outright tries to target out some of the key figures of said alliance that, he would be kind of working with for the round to just stay in the game, and it completely blows up in his face.
Yeah, he talks about how he doesn't like Sandra's anyone but me strategy, but how, that's what he has to emulate in order to survive the swap. But he doesn't emulate it. He goes after Sophie. He goes after Nate. Those are like big swings that he's trying to make, instead of actually doing the anyone but me thing and saying, hey, let's vote at Jason. If Jason's going to be the clear alternative target, let's push him. I mean, obviously, losing a fellow Hina member would suck, but it's better than going home. And what happens when he throws out Sophie's name? What happens when he throws out Nate's name? He goes home. Meanwhile, Jason just kind of sits there and goes, whatever happens, happens, and that works out great. And that's exactly what Matt should have done, because if that's what Matt had done, Jason probably would have gone home, because Savannah really did not trust Jason at all. So, yeah, I just think Matt plays the swap terribly. He makes himself a target when he didn't need to be the main target, at least. He does get swap screwed, but I don't think he's in a power position on his original tribe anyways. Sure, he's shown to have a relationship with Steven, who was for sure the most famous most powerful person on that tribe. But at the same time, he's kind of targeted by MC, who has the closest relationship with Steven, as we're shown later on. So I just don't know that he necessarily would have even survived if Hina had gone to a tribal council pre-swap. And for those reasons, he ends up here at number 6. Moving on to number 5 from Survivor 42, we have Swati Goel. Swati, she's at the time was the youngest person to ever play Survivor by birth year. I was really rooting for her going in, but she just doesn't play a very good game. She sort of leads the charge on Zach, which works out very well for her. And it's that move that really elevates her more so to the middle of this list. But then we just see some kind of messy gameplay from, trying to work with Tori, which immediately is kind of like Tori had already proven herself to be someone you maybe didn't want to necessarily try to work with. Doesn't work out for her because Tori says the wrong thing to Roxroy, and then Roxroy makes a weird decision to take that to Drea. Even then, Tori's originally targeted, but Romeo swaps the target to Swati after it's revealed that Swati is going around telling everybody that they're her number one, which is just messy. How do you think that you're going to get away with that? So there's a lot of pros and cons to Swati's game, which I guess is fitting for her to be placed right in the middle of this list. But at the end of the day, she is a messy player. She doesn't really have anything major aside from the Zach vote to like boost her game compared to the players that we have higher on this list. But I don't know. Do you have anything to add about Swati to really flesh out why she's where she is?
I think definitely you started to nail it on the head with the fact that she plays a very messy game. She overplays at times and doesn't necessarily make what would be a safe move at a lot of times. It's not typically a great idea to over complicate things and tell everyone that you're their number one, whereas in reality, some people are going to know and realize, hey, I'm maybe not this person's number one, but I'm still with them. And that's something you can really do, is you can really play up the social ability to convince people that they're still with them, even though you're not necessarily, 1 and 2 with each other. And, it's typically at least a better attempt to try and make that the occurrence long term than just going to every individual person and saying this. I also think that, unfortunately, she does kind of get played by Roxroy's decision a little bit, because sharing someone's advantage typically does backfire on someone. In this case, backfires on Swati. And that's definitely, I think the biggest takeaway from that is, had Swati not done that, I think there's a completely different situation. But I will say as well, to Swati's credit, Swati was aware enough to attempt to play a shot in the dark, and it didn't work. But at least, Swati had some awareness as to what was going to happen at the tribal and kind of figured things out, unlike a lot of the players below, where they didn't necessarily know they were going home when they did. I would say, at least for Matt, JD, and Geo for sure, they kind of weren't 100% of the realization of what was going to happen when they showed up at tribal, didn't think to play the shot in the dark.
I mean, JD, I think, does play a shot in the dark, but...
Yeah, but JD also gives up an advantage and thinks that potentially is still working with Shan at points that are shown in the episodes, at least, right up to that tribal. Whereas Swati kind of realizes going into it that it had shifted onto her because of Roxroy telling Drea, and then Drea and Romeo flipping it. So, it seems to be shown that it's pretty convincingly flipped earlier, whereas 100% for, Matt, who we've put just below, doesn't know what's going to happen necessarily and thinks that he might have pulled something off.
Yeah, I do think Swati has a little bit more awareness than the players we have below her. And I guess that's kind of what puts her where she is. But moving on to number 4, we have from Survivor 47, Anika Dhar. Anika, similarly to Swati, she does survive one tribal council where she, does seem to be in a good position. And then she attempts to form an all-women's alliance, which really does seem to solidify into a very real alliance. Certainly for Rachel, but even for Sierra, I think she very heavily considers this alliance as a potential option. Unfortunately for Anika, Sam and Sierra, their relationship is just a little bit too close, and Sam is able to convince Sierra, against her own better judgment, to work with Andy and vote out Anika. It's kind of an unlucky situation for Anika, but she does ultimately get outplayed, so you can't really give her too much credit.
Yeah, the biggest thing I would say with Anika is, unfortunately, unlike Swati kind of plays herself into a hole. I think Anika gets aimed into a hole and someone just outplays her. I think Sam's ability to persuade Sierra and really connect those two makes the big difference here. And it's not like Anika doesn't target a realistically solid, like, good choice of player in Andy. Andy was kind of ousted and is kind of the outcast and kind of like the loose cannon almost of the group at the time, and it is the logical person to target out. But unfortunately, Sam just has other plans and manages to flip people to prevent this from happening, which isn't entirely due to Anika being a bad player. Anika did believe in an alliance that she thought was going to hold true for that tribal.
Yeah. And like I said, I do think it's a consideration for Sierra at least to actually stick to that alliance. But it's just not what she chooses to do at the end of the day. Not really much else to say about Anika though, so... at number 3, we have, from Survivor 44, Sarah Wade. Honestly, probably one of the more forgettable players of the new era for me, but she actually, considering her placement, plays a pretty solid game. Do you want to start us off with Sarah and summarizing her game?
Yeah, Sarah finds herself in part of a majority alliance and isn't necessarily on the top. She's kind of on the bottom of the totem pole within said alliance. However, is partially flipped on by Carson because for some reason the idol confusion, he makes a read that it's in Helen's side and is incorrect about it. So Helen goes home, Sarah loses her number 1 ally, and Sarah finds herself in a situation where she looks like she'll be okay. She gets swapped in a tribe where she has multiple members of her original tribe, and then Josh, who is just by himself. But Josh has an idol. Pretty much realizes immediately, okay, I'm gonna have to play it. And then immediately results in Sarah and Jam Jam getting their votes blocked out. Sarah goes home. So I think it isn't necessarily Sarah's fault that she goes out there, but I mean, unfortunately, she just wasn't on the highest grounds within said alliance, and at the end of the day, Jam Jam was just way more likable and more charismatic, better social game at this point to really solidify the fact that one of the two of them going home was always going to be Sarah.
Mm-hmm. Well, and what I'll say is, like, with the swap, too, it's not even like it's a random swap where she just, like, happened to keep most of her original tribe. This was a weird swap where one person from each tribe got swapped into a new one, and they were given a free idol. So it's not even like Josh found this idol and then happened to get swapped into this tribe to use it. Josh was given this idol for free. And, you know, it was an idol that was, I believe, only good for one tribal or, like, maybe a couple tribals. The first tribal that they go to. So really, like, Josh didn't even make a decision to play this idol. This was an idol that literally expired at the first tribal that he would go to. So, at the end of the day, it's kind of a moot point because Sarah probably would have gone with or without the swap. At the end of the day, she was going up against the Tika 3 otherwise. But even then, the fact that she's put on the outs in the first place is due to Carson's poor read about Helen having the idol. So, how much can you really fault her for that? I don't know. But it's the weird situations surrounding her elimination that puts her this high. It's the fact that she had an alliance with Carson and Helen that could have really worked had it not been for the idol confusion caused by Carolyn. And, yeah, it's the fact that I just think she has a lot more potential than a lot of the other players in this list that puts her here at number 3, but much like a lot of these lists, the top 2 was kind of uncrackable. They were sort of 1A and 1B, and everyone else was very clearly below them, so we had some discussions surrounding the top 2, but at the end of the day, at number 2, we decided to put, from Survivor 48, Bianca Roses. Bianca, she got Cedric, and I'll pass the mic off to Connor so he can explain how that happened.
Well, you see, as per many players in Survivor 48, Cedric made a decision that would leave most people completely baffled. His logic was so clearly before, Justin, had you just told me, I would have worked with you. So what does Bianca do without fully knowing this? She goes, you know what, Cedric? I'm going to be honest, buddy. I lost my vote. And Cedric goes, okay, thank you for telling me. Immediately turns around, hey everybody, we're voting up Bianca now. Like, what kind of backwards fucking logic is that? That one time it's the correct answer, and it was incorrectly done. And this time, they've done the thing you said was previously correct, but now it's wrong. So like, I think that that's the biggest thing that puts Bianca so high, is the fact that she had a decent spot, probably wouldn't have been the first out, maybe second or third from her tribe. That's left to be determined. But that's not even necessarily a guarantee, because we don't know what would have happened in that alliance, because she gets swapped into a situation with Cedric. And the vote results are weird too, because if I'm not mistaken, it's Chrissy and Cedric who vote for Bianca, and then Say gets a vote from, I believe it's Mitch, and like there's a 2-1-1 split where Bianca just doesn't have her vote and just goes home because Cedric says so.
And what Cedric says goes for some reason. That being said, on the original log you tried, those dynamics are kind of difficult to parse. We know that there was the California Girls Alliance, which Bianca wasn't part of, but she was Thomas, who was part of the California Girls' closest ally. We know that Star was supposedly on the outs. However, we see Thomas and Bianca try to create inroads with Star to potentially work with her to make a big move. And we just don't know how that would have gone. We don't know how anything would have gone. Say Loggy happened to be a disaster tribe, and they went to multiple tribal councils. Do Bianca and Thomas, do they make a move with Star against someone like Joe or Shaheen? Is it a simple Star boot, and then at the next tribal council they have to decide between Bianca and Eva? Because if that's the case, I think Bianca goes home. Otherwise, maybe we see Shaheen and Joe be the first ones to go, and then, or Eva, probably, even. And Bianca could have been in a power position, but I just don't see that as the most likely scenario. So her power on the original Loggy tribe is sort of nebulous. And then on the swap, well, she does definitely get screwed over. I think she has an out where, knowing that she doesn't have her vote, she could have gone with Say and tried to take out Cedric, because Say at that point doesn't trust Cedric at all. He just voted for her twice. She literally throws him under the bus immediately. So Bianca could have kept things simple, try to work with Say, vote out Cedric, and I think that probably would have worked for her. And so that's another point, maybe keeping her out of the number one spot, is the fact that she did have a pretty clear out, I think, to not go home here. But at the same time, she does go home due to a baffling decision by Cedric. She does get swap screwed. She does have some power on that original Loggy tribe, even if it's a little bit of like Schrodinger's power. We don't know. Would have depended on how that first Loggy tribe went had they gone. At the end of the day, there's a lot of question marks surrounding Bianca's game, but she definitely gets massively screwed over. She definitely gets Cedrick'd, so that does put her up here in the top two pretty definitively for us. But that being said, by process of elimination, our number one from Survivor 45, we have Brando Meyer. And Brando, very similarly to Bianca, does get swap screwed. I'll say the key differences between Bianca and Brando's games are A, the clear power that Brando has on that original Bello tribe, right? Brando and Kelly are smack dab in the middle between the other women and the other men, they would have been making the decisions on that tribe. I think no matter how many tribals Bella went to, I think that the two of them would have been the final two. So there's that. I don't know that Bianca and Thomas would have been the final two standing on Logie. So that's sort of something that Brando holds over Bianca. Now, as for the post-swap situation, Connor, do you want to kind of explain why we feel like Brando might have played that a little bit better than Bianca?
Yeah, so Brando has, unfortunately, a couple things working for him and a couple things working against him. Plus, he is there with his number one ally and is in a 5-person tribe where there's one person in the middle who could be flipped. And Brando does a pretty decent job of playing Drew against himself and playing this up to Emily. Emily starts buying into it. Emily starts believing, holy crap, maybe I've misread Drew. I might have to go with Brando. And then Austin, out of left field, the man who was complaining to everyone, I wanted my sandwiches, gets an advantage, shows Emily, and flips the game back on Brando. Brando found himself in a swing vote situation that he lost to a guy who was angry because he didn't get a fucking sandwich. Brando's fate was decided in the game because Austin didn't get his sandwich. That's my argument here.
Yeah, I mean, if Austin got his sandwich, he wouldn't have had that amulet to show to Emily. And, well, I don't think necessarily that amulet was needed, was absolutely crucial to Austin and Drew regaining Emily's trust. I think it was definitely the silver bullet. Whether or not they could have kept her in their good graces with or without that amulet is definitely questionable, but based on what we were shown on the show, it was really what solidified that trust between that trio and sealed Brando's fate, and it wasn't even something that Austin wanted. I think that Brando does a good job at putting suspicion onto Drew. Like you said, Connor, I think that initially being like, look, I'd be willing to vote out Kendra isn't necessarily a bad move, even if it backfires on him a little bit. So I just think that at the end of the day, Brando does everything. I don't want to say he does everything right, because obviously he gets voted out, but there isn't like an obvious decision that he could have made, I don't think, that would have been better for him in that situation than the ones that he ends up making. And it almost works for him. Just like it almost works for Bianca. But it really almost works for Brando. And, well, Bianca, almost survives. Brando almost makes a move and takes out Drew, which would have been massive for his game. So, for those reasons, Brando does end up above Bianca. Well, we did kind of discuss potentially putting Bianca in first place. Brando ultimately ends up taking the crown as the best 13th placer in Survivor New Area history, and I hope that's a crown that he wears proudly. It's a little bit of an esoteric achievement, but it's yours, Brando. Anything final to wrap up Brando, talking about him?
Honestly, no. I think Brando, again, unfortunately, in Survivor history, there's a lot of players who suffer from just unfortunate situations, and I think in this situation, we're looking at someone who does genuinely play a pretty solid game up into his elimination. It's really tough to say how far he would have gone had the swap not gone that exact way, because he does look like he have a lot of power, and he does seem to be playing a pretty smart game. But unfortunately, he gets voted out for ultimately just not having enough pull over a flip vote.
Quite frankly, I'll say it, if Emily ends up siding with Brando and Drew goes home, we could see a very similar situation to how the season actually played out, but with a Bello 4 consisting of Brando, Kelly, and then probably Katura and Kendra, along with Emily taking control of the game. maybe letting go of Bruce and Jake early, much like Reba let go of Jemiah and Sifu, and then getting to the end where where I think we could see a Brando or Kelly win. I mean, it's definitely a lot of speculation there, but you know, the Brando boot might have been the vote that really solidified the way that the rest of the game went. And if it had been Drew in that spot instead of Brando, I don't know. I think it would have been a very different season that we would have ended up watching. So,
And you know what? I don't entirely disagree with that. I think that's a pretty fair statement to say that. I mean, they looked like the tribe that was in charge of the game in terms of challenges. I think they could have won a decent few as a group, enough so that they probably could have gotten rid of Dee and Julie, who I think could have potentially been in their way. Austin as well.
mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't know that it had been as clean, but I definitely think that is a possibility, something that could have happened. And I do very much think there's a world where the final 4 or 5 does consist of Brando, Katurah, Kelly, Kendra, and then maybe one of, you know, Reba, maybe Emily still there at like final 5 or 6. So
Mm-hmm.
it's a very real world. I think that you know, it's a can of worms we open up if Emily does side with Bello instead of Reba.
Yeah. Well, we could even see like Jemiah or Sifu crack that top 5 and, you know, fill the sort of Katurah and Jake shoes, you know? Like if I were to do a 1-to-1, you know, type comparison, like maybe we have Kelly is the D, Brando is the Austin, someone like Sifu is the Jake, Jemiah is the Katurah, and then rounding out that top 5, we have Kendra as the Julie, and then I don't know, something along those lines. It could have happened. Obviously, it probably wouldn't have been 1-to-1. It wouldn't have gone exactly the same, just like with the roles reversed. But I do think that the season would have played out very differently. And I think that's a marker of a pretty good early boot. Is just sort of the question of if they had survived one more tribal, how far could they have gone? And Brando really could have gone very far if he had survived just one more tribal. But that being said, I think that's really all there is to say about Brando. I think that's all there is to say about these players. It's a very eclectic group of players. A lot of people who sort of overplay their hand, a lot of people who get swap screwed. But at the end of the day, that's the nature of 14th place in the new era, I guess. We hope you enjoyed this video. We definitely enjoyed making it. We hope you look forward to the next one. And with all that being said, the pod has spoken.